Speaker, I wanted to thank you and especially Speaker Oliver for posting this extraordinary measure. It's probably one of the highlights of my legislative tenure, and no matter what the ultimate outcome, it's one that I'll remember the rest of my life. I also want to thank my co-prime sponsors, Connie Wagner, Myla J.C., Don McKeon, Valerie Veneer-Huddle, Jason O'Donnell, John Wisniewski, Tim Eustace, and Ruben Ramos, as well as all the other co-sponsors. And I also wanted to especially thank the majority staff under Bill Caruso, and particularly Carrie Osmond and Tom Guerrieri on my staff who worked tirelessly to get us here. We spend such little time down here, and we legislators often forget how important our staffs are to us and how they're often underappreciated. I also wanted to acknowledge my mother, Rosemary, who came here. She was married to my dad for 40 years, and she was a friend, Angie Wizard. Her husband was the Democratic chair back in the 70s who first got me started in politics. I also want to acknowledge the hundreds of letters and phone calls and emails and personal visits that weighed in on this important issue. One particular text I received was from a friend who saw me on TV. I hadn't seen him in a long time, and now her daughter's 10 years old, and she said that my daughter said, "Hey, I recognize that guy." And then when her mom explained why I was on TV, she said she, the 10-year-old, couldn't understand why everyone can't get married to the person that they love. For those who oppose this measure, I realize that this is a difficult decision to make. It is a question that tests our fundamental sense of liberty found in our federal and state constitutions. We rarely ever get to put safeguards in place to protect the things we like. It is the difficult things, like safeguarding against government intrusions into our civil rights and liberties, that is often hard to deal with and so easy to push on to another day. Well, we are here now, and I hope you can vote your conscience and listen to the constituents and support the rationale today that this is a vote that history will want to know at the end of the day what side you were on. Whether it has been for women's suffrage or ending segregation laws, history remembers those who had the moral courage to do what was right. We sometimes get lost in all the noise of public debate, media attention, misperceptions, and misinformation regarding this issue. Indeed, we have heard a lot about the arguments against same-sex marriage, as we did when we ended the miscegenation laws banning interracial marriages in the 60s. I'm particularly reminded of Carrie Loving, a simple bricklayer in Virginia, who happened to be white and wanted to marry Mildred Jeter, an African American. And subsequently, both of them were arrested after their marriage. The authorities, including the district judge, as well as those who wish to continue to ban on interracial marriages, stated that allowing them to marry would reconstitute and redefine what marriage stood for. That God did not intend the blending of the races, that children would be harmed, and that it would lead to marrying to one's all. All absurd arguments by today's standards, but nonetheless have endured both societies' otherwise rational development and time. Moreover, throughout this legislative process, there's been a lot of name-calling. One state senator called me a coward for not wanting a public vote. Another member even said it was a slap in the face to those on the unemployment line. And then there's the governor. And I like the governor. I was grateful that we had a chance to sit down last week, not only talk about this issue, but what was important in my district. I don't want to speak like the governor, but I got a sense that neither of us felt such trivial words were such a big deal. After all, it was in the heat of political discussion. There were passionate arguments on both sides. But in the end, the lesson we learned is that words do matter. And that's an essence whether one set of persons can say they are married and another persons are relegated to second-class citizenship, we call civil unionized. And yet, both persons, both couples, are in the same circumstances. Words do matter, especially when it's the government who defines who can be married. If we can only look at Governor William Bradford today, who in May 1621 performed the first civil marriage in Plymouth Colony, thus setting the precedent of the state's recognition of this right. The point being that as long as the government defines the word marriage, it should be done on an equitable basis. Indeed, under the New Jersey statutes, Title 37, this is the book that defines what marriage constitutes in this state. My only point is that if government indeed decides what constitutes a marriage, it should be done on an equitable basis. We heard from others that marriage should be linked to so-called traditions and that this institution has not changed in 2,000 years. I'm sure we're going to hear a lot of that today. That if we look at those marriage laws, we don't have to go back 2,000 years. Let's just go back to the marriage laws of 1776, when divorce was illegal, or when women were property, or the laws on coverture, when all the women's possessions were turned over to the husband once they were married. And then there were arranged marriages. The fact remains, marriage has evolved over time. We actually base them on love this time around, and so words do matter. In committee, we heard from the countless people who were living together 10 years, 20 years as a couple. I heard from a lesbian couple in my district that were duly married in Massachusetts, where they lived, and then they moved to New Jersey, and once they crossed the border, they became civil unionized. Is that fair? I heard words from the children of the same-sex couple parents, but they do not understand why their moms and dads can't marry the person they love. I was asked why a state that governs who is to be called married has chosen to discriminate against gays and lesbians. Words do matter. I also want to know that I can't change who I am. Otherwise, it begs the question why I wouldn't. Why countless LGBT teens who struggle with bullying on a daily basis would not simply change for the easier. It's very simple, they can't. Moreover, it should not be hard to understand why there are so many LGBT youth who feel isolation when the government reinforces a culture that proclaims, you are different and you will be treated as such. When we have a chance to change a word, nothing more, nothing less, the institution of marriage will not suffer by our action today. We'll instead reinforce the promise extended by our founding fathers that all persons are free and independent, that they are endowed with certain unalienable rights. Now, I know there's others that want to take a detour and put the issue on a ballot. They want to ignore the fact that we are here to vote on things in a representative democracy. Putting this issue to the ballot is the wrong thing to do. Very un-Madisonian, who established the protections of tyranny of the majority in the Federalist Paper 51. James Madison reasoned that in a free government, the security for civil rights must be a paramount concern whenever the unjust views of the majority will prevail upon the rightful interests of the minority. And that's what we need to do. Madisonian principle was reaffirmed by the U.S. Court of Appeals in overturning the California's proposition question on marriage. We New Jerseyans should feel the same way. Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Robert Frost once said, home is the place where when you go there, they have to take you in. In a home, government has recognized our home values, our privacy, our ability to raise a family, what we do there. It's a fundamental right that we should reserve for all. You don't have to come to my home, I don't have to come to yours. And that's what this is all about. Whether you allow two In the end, our constitutional protections are eroded when the governor and the government, and who the opponents want us to, dictates what constitutes the kind of family that makes up a home. In this regard, we are always taught the strengths of humankind are faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these three is love. Today is an opportunity for you to stand up to the greatest of these and vote for love. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I came to the conclusion that the people set it for my district here to vote what was right and to protect all the people and to ensure the rights of everybody, regardless of their gender, race, religion, or sexual preference. This bill today is not a religious issue.
Mr. Speaker, motion to table as received. 44 votes in the affirmative, 31 in the